What if the person you love the most pretended to be dying, just to see who truly cares? When billionaire Richard Dalton fakes a terminal illness, the shocking reactions of his family expose dark secrets, betrayal, and greed. But one daughter's unconditional love changes everything. Watch this emotional story all the way to the end. You will be surprised at what happened. Richard Dalton had built an empire. From his first software startup in a tiny Chicago garage to a multi-billion-dollar tech conglomerate, Dalton Systems was now a household name. But after decades of wealth and power, Richard sat in his penthouse suite wondering, did his family love him, or had he just become a walking bank account? His wife, Linda, lived in a whirlwind of champagne galas and designer boutiques. His three eldest children, Michael, Brandon, and Vanessa, held high-ranking positions in his company, but their concern always seemed to circle back to profits, perks, and prestige. Only his youngest, Emma, a modest schoolteacher in Oregon, stayed humble and distant from the family drama. On a crisp fall evening, Richard called a private meeting in his study with two of the only people he trusted, his lawyer, George Aldridge, and his personal physician, Dr. Karen Brooks. "I want to fake a diagnosis," he said, pouring himself a rare scotch. "Ellis, something slow but incurable. I want to see who truly cares." George blinked. "Amyotrophic lateral sclerosis? Exactly. I will lose muscle control, pretend to need help walking, speaking, maybe even breathing. But my mind will stay sharp and watching." Dr. Brooks leaned forward. "You realize the emotional toll this might take? On you. On Emma." "I need the truth more than comfort," Richard said firmly. "Start the paperwork. Create the reports. We will leak it quietly." Within days, the story broke. The billionaire tech legend had been diagnosed with late-stage ALS. The media flooded in with tributes. His family rushed to his side with hugs, forced tears, and solemn promises. At first, they all hovered. Linda offered to organize private nurses but never actually sat by his side. Michael started attending meetings in his name. Brandon casually brought up stock restructuring. Vanessa cried dramatically at the first dinner, then didn't return for a week. Richard watched from his private wing, made to look like a medical ward. Hidden cameras rolled 24/7. He wore makeup to appear pale and weak. Dr. Brooks coached him on mimicking speech trouble and hand tremors. Only Emma showed up with nothing in hand but love. She made his meals, read to him, and held his hand during quiet afternoons. "Don't worry about the business or the money, Dad," she whispered one night. "I just want you to be okay." 3 weeks later, Linda had moved into the guest house and was spotted dining with a much younger man. Michael threw exclusive boardroom events. Brandon slashed longtime employee benefits. Vanessa pressured George for early access to her share. Richard, broken-hearted but steady, turned to George. "It's time to go to the lake house in Vermont. I want to tell Emma the truth. She deserves it." George nodded solemnly. "And the others? They'll get their turn," Richard said. "Just not the one they're expecting." The crisp Vermont air hit Richard Dalton like a bomb as George helped him out of the car. Emma stood by the porch of the old lake house, her eyes full of worry and warmth. It was a place filled with childhood memories, summers on the lake, campfire stories, late-night fishing. This house had always been their escape from the noise of the world. Emma ran down the steps. "Dad, careful, here. Lean on me," she said, gently placing her arm around his. Richard smiled inwardly. Every touch, every word from her was genuine. There were no cameras here, no press, no audience, just the two of them. Once inside, George gave them privacy. Richard settled into his favorite leather chair by the fireplace. Emma draped a blanket over his legs and handed him a warm mug of chamomile tea. "Dad, why here? Is something wrong?" she asked, sitting across from him, her brow furrowed. Richard took a slow breath. His hands trembled slightly. He had gotten used to feigning weakness, but this time it felt heavier, because what he was about to say would change everything. "Emma, I'm not sick," he said, his voice steady for the first time in weeks. She blinked. What do you mean? I don't have ALS. It was a setup. A test. I needed to know the truth about the people around me. What they would do if they thought I was dying. Emma stared at him in stunned silence. You faked it? All of it. Richard nodded, shame flickering in his eyes. The only people who knew were George and Dr. Brooks. I moved half my assets to a private trust before the news broke. Then I watched. The rest of the family. They showed their true colors. He explained everything, the hidden cameras, the daily reports, the fake symptoms. Emma covered her mouth in disbelief as he listed betrayal after betrayal. Linda's coldness, Michael's takeover schemes, Brandon's ruthless cost-cutting, Vanessa's entitlement. But you, Emma, his voice cracked. You showed me something real. You gave up everything to take care of me. You didn't ask for a dime. Not once. Tears welled up in her eyes. I thought I was going to lose you, Dad. I know, and I'm sorry for putting you through that pain. But you saved me, not just from my loneliness, but from the illusion I had of my family. You're the only one who came out of this with a clean heart. They sat in silence for a moment, the fire crackling between them. Finally, Emma asked, So, what now? Richard's expression hardened. Now we go back, but not as the dying man. I'm going to confront each of them. They'll learn what betrayal really costs. Emma wiped her tears and stood tall. Then let's do it. Together. When Richard Dalton returned to his Connecticut estate, it wasn't as the frail man they remembered. His steps were steady, and his voice carried weight again. Emma walked beside him, her jaw set, silently bracing for the storm about to unfold. The staff froze when they saw him walk through the front door without assistance. One maid even dropped a vase. Mr. Dalton? She gasped. Yes, Maggie. I'm walking. Surprise, Richard said dryly. Let everyone know we're having a family meeting. Tonight. Word spread like wildfire. By evening, the entire Dalton clan was gathered in the main parlor. Michael, Brandon, Vanessa, and Linda, all looking confused, even alarmed. What's going on? Linda asked, clutching her wine glass. You're not using your walker. I'm not using anything because I'm not sick, Richard said, stepping into the center of the room. I never had ALS. I faked it to see who actually cared. The silence was deafening. Michael's eyes darted nervously. Brandon looked down at his watch. Vanessa blinked, her mouth slightly open. Linda just scoffed. You faked being terminally ill? Michael finally said. That's sick, Dad. No, Richard replied. What's sick is watching your own family scheme and abandon you while they think you're dying. That's what's sick. Brandon stood up. You expect us to believe this was some noble lesson? You lied to all of us. And you fired loyal employees. You threw parties in my house. You treated my illness like a countdown clock to your inheritance. Vanessa snapped. So what now? You going to punish us for not playing nurse? Emma stepped forward. You didn't just fail to play nurse. You didn't visit him. You didn't care. All you talked about was money. Richard raised a hand to quiet the room. I recorded everything. Every conversation. Every action. Even you, Linda, your little rendezvous in Manhattan? I know about the young man, the apartment, all of it. Linda turned pale. Richard, we've been through a lot. Enough, he said coldly. You all failed the test. Except for Emma. She gave me her time, her heart, and her loyalty without asking for anything. Michael scoffed. So what? Emma gets everything now? Richard paused, then nodded. Yes, she inherits it all. The company. The estates, the offshore trust, everything. You can't be serious, Vanessa shrieked. You made your choices, Richard said, and now you'll live with them. Brandon stepped forward, anger flashing. You think the board will go along with this? They already know, Richard replied, and they've accepted Emma as interim CEO, starting today. The siblings stood stunned as Emma met their eyes. No malice. Just quiet conviction. This isn't revenge, Richard said. It's clarity. He turned and walked out of the room, Emma by his side. Behind them, years of entitlement cracked and crumbled like broken glass. The next morning, Emma stood in the boardroom of Dalton Technologies, a place that had long felt like a fortress reserved for suits, secrets, and strategy. Now, she stood at the head of the table, flanked by Richard on one side and George on the other. Her siblings sat across from her, forced into silence by the weight of what had transpired. The board had already voted. Richard's shares had been officially transferred to Emma, giving her majority control. The documents were ironclad. There was nothing Michael, Brandon, or Vanessa could do to reverse it. Richard cleared his throat. Today marks a new chapter. My daughter Emma will assume the role of CEO effective immediately. I expect full cooperation. Michael, ever the slick talker, leaned forward. Dad, this is a massive mistake. Emma doesn't have corporate experience. She's a teacher, not a businesswoman. And yet she has more integrity than any of you, Richard shot back. Which, frankly, is more valuable to this company right now than any of your Ivy League degrees. Vanessa rolled her eyes. So what, we just get cut out completely? No, Emma said gently. You're not being fired, but your roles are being reassessed. You'll be reporting to a new executive panel, one that I will select and oversee. Brandon stood up. I'm not reporting to my little sister. Richard's voice was sharp. Then you're free to leave. Brandon hesitated. He wasn't used to consequences. He slowly sat back down, jaw tight. Emma looked around the table. I know I'm not who you expected, but I'm not here to play favorites or settle scores. I'm here to rebuild this company, to restore the ethics and loyalty Dad founded it on. We're rehiring the employees Brandon fired, reversing the budget cuts, and we're shifting focus back to innovation, not indulgence. Some of the board members, longtime colleagues of Richard, nodded in approval. Later that day, in the executive suite, Emma met with key staff. There were cautious stares at first, whispers in corners. But after a heartfelt town hall where she spoke openly about her journey and the company's new direction, something changed. People started to believe in her. Meanwhile, Richard wandered the halls like a ghost from the past, watching the transition unfold with quiet pride. The empire he built was in safe hands now, not because of strategy or numbers, but because of character. That evening, Emma and Richard sat on the terrace, looking out at the skyline. You think they'll come around? She asked, sipping tea. They might, Richard replied. Or they might not. Doesn't really matter. What matters is that you don't lose yourself in this. Emma looked at him, thoughtful. I won't, but I will make you proud. You already have, he said. In the shadows of betrayal, a new kind of leadership was rising, one rooted in grace, not greed. The days following Emma's appointment as CEO were anything but quiet. The media caught wind of the miracle recovery of Richard Dalton and the shocking news that his youngest daughter, previously unknown in the business world, was now running Dalton Technologies. Headlines ranged from skeptical to scandalous. Billionaire's daughter takes reins after family power grab. Teacher turned CEO. Emma Dalton shocks corporate world. Inside the Dalton estate, the mood was tense. Linda had retreated into silence, refusing to speak to Richard unless absolutely necessary. She wandered the house like a ghost, avoiding his eyes, her once commanding presence dulled by embarrassment and disbelief. Vanessa, meanwhile, was unraveling. She had counted on her inheritance to fund a new fashion line, and now, that dream was slipping through her fingers. She stormed into Richard's study one afternoon, her heels clicking across the floor like gunshots. You really gave it all to her? She asked, arms folded. You're choosing Emma over your other children? I'm choosing the one who chose me, Richard replied calmly, not even looking up from his newspaper. I'm your daughter too. And what did you do when you thought I was dying? He asked quietly. Did you bring me food? Sit by my bed? Or did you demand a financial breakdown of the estate? Vanessa flushed. That's not fair. It's exactly fair. She stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Brandon, angry but more calculated, called a private meeting with George. There's no way this holds legally, he said. There has to be a clause. A way to challenge the trust or reverse the transfer. George adjusted his glasses. Your father's not a fool, Brandon. Everything was handled months ago. Ironclad. There is no loophole. Michael tried a different route. He approached Emma directly at the company headquarters. Look, I know Dad's angry, but you can't seriously think you can run this place alone. Emma remained composed. I'm not alone. Dad's advising me, the board supports me, and I've brought in a team of people who believe in real leadership. We're not just making profits anymore, we're making things right. Michael smirked. You're going to learn quickly that sentiment doesn't pay dividends. Maybe not, she said, but people do. Back at home, Richard sat alone in the garden, looking at old family photos. One of them, taken years ago, showed all 4 kids smiling on a fishing trip. It made his chest tighten. He hadn't wanted things to end this way, but now he saw how far they had drifted from what mattered. That night, Emma joined him outside, wrapping a blanket around his shoulders. Still thinking about them? Always, he said. They're still my children. I love them, but sometimes love means closing a door, so they finally learn how to knock. Emma leaned against his arm, the wind whispering through the trees. The next day, Emma rose early, walking the quiet halls of Dalton Technologies before the building buzzed to life. Her footsteps echoed on the marble floors as she passed rows of awards, plaques, and portraits, each one a reminder of the legacy she had inherited, not just in wealth, but in weight. At her desk, she reviewed the HR reinstatement list. Dozens of names, longtime employees Brandon had axed during his cost-efficiency wave, were being welcomed back. Her new executive assistant, Danny, stepped in with a bright smile. Some of the returning staff are arriving today. Thought you'd want to greet them yourself. I do, Emma said, standing up. Let's remind them that this company still values loyalty. Later that morning, the elevator doors opened to a crowd of stunned faces. Older engineers, receptionists, and warehouse supervisors who thought their careers had ended, now stood before her. Welcome home, Emma said sincerely. I'm sorry for what happened to you. That's not what this company stands for. Not anymore. One woman, with graying hair and teary eyes, stepped forward. Your father hired me 30 years ago. He said loyalty would always matter here. I guess it still does. It always will, Emma promised. Back at the estate, the air was colder. Linda had quietly begun moving her things into a guest condo Richard offered, his final act of grace. There were no more arguments between them, just silence, wounds too deep to dress. Richard spent his days either walking the grounds with a cane he didn't need or advising Emma remotely. Though his mind was sharp, the emotional toll of the past weeks had aged him. Still, he never wavered in his decision. One afternoon, he sat with George in the study. I keep asking myself, was it too harsh? George took a breath. What they did wasn't just selfish, it was revealing. You didn't punish them, Richard. You exposed them. What they lost wasn't money. It was trust. Richard nodded. And that's harder to earn back than a fortune. Meanwhile, the siblings were struggling to adjust. Brandon tried launching his own consultancy, but word of his unethical cuts at Dalton Technologies followed him. Michael attempted to rally old contacts for a merger proposal but found doors now closed. Vanessa's fashion venture crumbled under mounting debt. No one wanted to partner with a socialite whose reputation was now stained by greed. Still, none of them reached out. Pride built high walls. That evening, as Emma and Richard shared dinner on the back patio, she said softly, "Do you think they'll ever come around?" Richard looked at the fading sunset. Maybe, but not for money. That door's closed. Emma looked down. And if they came just to say sorry? Then I will listen, Richard said. But love can't be demanded. It has to be earned. As the stars blinked to life above them, Emma knew her father hadn't just passed down a company. He had handed her a legacy of truth. It had been a month since the power shift, and life was beginning to find a new rhythm. Emma had settled into her role with quiet confidence. The company was stabilizing, the media frenzy was dying down, and Richard's health, though never in danger, was the strongest it had been in years. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, Emma was in a meeting when her assistant buzzed in. "Miss Dalton, your brother Michael is in the lobby. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's urgent." Emma paused, surprised. Michael hadn't spoken to her since the night their father revealed the truth. "Send him up," she said, curiosity overriding caution. When the door opened, Michael stepped in, looking noticeably different. The cocky bravado was gone. His suit was wrinkled, and his usual smirk had been replaced by something softer. Humility, or maybe just desperation. "Emma," he said, voice low, "thanks for seeing me." She gestured for him to sit, saying nothing. "I didn't come to fight," he began, "and I'm not here to ask for money. I needed to talk to someone. Someone who didn't turn their back on Dad." Emma folded her hands. "I'm listening." Michael took a deep breath. "I messed up. We all did. But I've had time to think. I didn't even recognize the person I was becoming. Power made me blind. Dad's test, it forced me to see that." Emma watched him closely. He seemed genuine, but after everything, trust didn't come easily. "I'm not asking for a place at the table," Michael continued. "I know I lost that. I just want to make amends. Even if it's just helping with community outreach or working under someone else, I want to do something that matters. No titles. No ego." Emma nodded slowly. "It's not my forgiveness you need." "I know," he said. "I would like to talk to him if he'll let me." Emma hesitated. "I'll ask him. That's all I can promise." That evening, as the rain tapped against the windows of the Dalton estate, Emma relayed the conversation to Richard. He said nothing for a long time. Then finally, "He showed up in the rain? Uninvited and didn't ask for money?" "Nope. Just a chance to make things right." Richard stared into the fireplace, his jaw tight. "Let him come tomorrow. One meeting." Emma smiled faintly. "You're softening." "No," he said. "I'm watching for roots. One apology doesn't fix the past, but it's where healing begins." The next day, Michael arrived at the house, not in a luxury car, but in a modest sedan. He didn't bring a briefcase or documents, just himself. When he walked into the den, Richard didn't stand. He just looked at his son with eyes that had seen too much. Michael sat across from him and cleared his throat. "Dad, I'm sorry." It was only 2 words, but they felt heavier than any speech. For the first time since the betrayal, father and son sat across from each other, without pretense, without power plays. Just men. Just family. Michael's visit opened a door no one had expected, not just for him, but for the rest of the Dalton family as well. Word of his meeting with Richard spread quickly, not through tabloids or social media, but through whispers at family dinners and strained text threads. For weeks, none of the others had dared to approach Richard after the fallout. But now the ice was beginning to melt, one hesitant apology at a time. Vanessa was the next to crack. She showed up unannounced one Saturday afternoon. Emma opened the door, eyebrows raised. "I didn't come to argue," Vanessa said, hands clutching the handle of a designer umbrella. Can I talk to Dad?" Emma stepped aside. "He's in the garden." Vanessa found him there, trimming bonsai trees with quiet focus. Richard didn't look up when she approached. "You always hated those shoes," he said, his voice steady. Vanessa gave a sheepish smile. "You remember?" "I remember everything," he said, finally glancing at her. "Why are you here?" "I don't know," she admitted. "To say something real, maybe. I was awful. Selfish. I saw your diagnosis as a green light. I don't even recognize who I became." Richard didn't speak for a while, just kept snipping branches with slow, practiced cuts. "I used to think money was the proof that we were loved," Vanessa added. "Like if you bought me things, it meant I mattered. But now I see that I traded your trust for a shopping spree." She looked down, waiting for the anger, but it didn't come. Instead, Richard said quietly, "Pain doesn't excuse what you did, but I'd rather hear truth than excuses." Vanessa sat down beside him on the bench. "I miss being your daughter, not the heiress. Just your daughter." Richard finally nodded. "Then start there. By the following week, Brandon arrived. Reluctantly, yes, but still, he came. His tone wasn't as soft as Michael's or as reflective as Vanessa's, but he owned up to the worst of his decisions. I made a mess of things, he admitted. Thought if I proved I could run the company better than you, I'd earn your respect. You thought wrong, Richard replied. I know, Brandon said. But if there's work to do, grunt work, clean up, whatever, I want to do it. Not because I deserve anything, but because I need to remember what real work looks like. Richard gave him the same opportunity he'd given the others. No promises, no positions. Just a path. And whether they walked it sincerely was up to them. Meanwhile, Emma continued leading the company with a steady hand. The staff admired her not just for her ethics but her grace under pressure. She hadn't gloated or bragged about her position. She simply showed up, led with clarity, and made things better. That night, as Richard watched his children seated around the same dinner table, no contracts, no agendas, he whispered to Emma, "You did this." She smiled. "No, Dad, you did. You just needed to see who we really were." The following weeks unfolded like slow-burning redemption. With the first cracks in the family's walls now open, Richard Dalton began shaping his final legacy, not just with legal documents or trust accounts, but with intentional choices. One morning, he summoned Emma and George to his study. The fireplace crackled, casting warm light on the same desk where so many deals had been signed over the decades. "I've rewritten the estate plan," Richard began, sliding a thick folder across the desk. "This isn't about revenge. It's about reflection." George opened the file, his eyes scanning the details. Emma leaned forward, surprised to see that Richard had restored partial inheritance shares to Michael, Vanessa, and Brandon, though carefully structured with conditions. "They're not getting blank checks," Richard explained. "Each of them will have to meet key milestones, proof of accountability, community work, rebuilding trust. The money will be released in stages, not all at once." Emma was quiet for a long moment. "Are you sure, Dad? After everything they did?" "I'm not rewarding the past," Richard replied. "I'm investing in the future. I'm choosing to believe they can change." He looked at her with tired, honest eyes. "And if they don't, the trust reverts to you." Emma nodded, swallowing the emotion in her throat. Later that day, the family met in the great room, where Richard laid everything out. He made no grand speeches, no scolding remarks, just facts. He offered them a path to redemption, but not without responsibility. Michael accepted it with gratitude. "I'll earn it, I promise." Vanessa, her voice quieter than anyone had ever heard, simply nodded. "Thank you for not giving up on us." Brandon, always the slowest to thaw, asked, "Why give us a second chance after everything?" Richard leaned on his cane. "Because someone gave me one once, and I'm still standing because of it." Afterward, the mood in the house shifted. Tension turned to tentative peace. The siblings, still cautious, began speaking to one another without sarcasm or suspicion. Small acts built trust. Brandon helped Emma coordinate a charity tech drive. Vanessa hosted a fundraiser to support laid-off employees. Michael volunteered to mentor interns at the company. Emma oversaw it all not as a ruler but as a guide. Meanwhile, Richard began writing a memoir, not for fame, but for clarity. In its pages, he wrote about loss and legacy, about wealth and worth, about how sometimes the richest people in the world are bankrupt in love until tested. One afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the estate's towering oak trees, he handed Emma the first chapter. "If I don't finish it, I want you to." She took the worn notebook, heart full. "You built this family, Dad," she said softly. "No," he replied. "I built a fortune. You built the family." The past couldn't be erased, but it could be transformed. And now, with each step forward, the Dalton family was writing a different story, one rooted in something even stronger than wealth. The days after Richard shared his new estate plan brought an unexpected peace to the Dalton household. The siblings, though still cautious, began taking small steps toward rebuilding what had been fractured. Emma continued her steady leadership at Dalton Technologies, proving daily that integrity and compassion could drive success. One warm summer afternoon, the family gathered on the sprawling back patio. Richard sat in his favorite chair beneath the oak tree, watching his children converse, no longer with bitterness or greed, but with tentative hope. Michael spoke about launching a mentorship program for underserved youth interested in technology. Vanessa shared plans for a nonprofit supporting single mothers returning to work. Brandon, humbler and quieter, described his work helping streamline operations under Emma's guidance. Linda, once distant, was present too, not as a wife reclaiming the past, but as a mother willing to heal alongside her family. Emma raised a glass. To new beginnings and second chances. To family. Glasses clinked softly, laughter filled the air, and Richard smiled. The legacy he feared was lost had simply been waiting for a new chapter. As the sun set, Emma walked her father to the garden bench. "Are you proud?" she asked. He nodded. "Proud of the family you've helped us become. Proud that love, true love, has the power to heal even the deepest wounds." They sat quietly, the stars beginning to sparkle overhead. The fortune Richard once thought defined him was eclipsed by the wealth of restored relationships. And in that moment, the Dalton family was whole again. As the Dalton family embraced a new chapter of healing and growth, Richard realized that true legacy isn't measured in wealth, but in love and forgiveness. Their journey showed that even the deepest wounds can mend when loyalty and kindness lead the way. If this story inspired you, please like, share, and subscribe for more heartfelt stories about family, trust, and second chances. Tell us in the comments, what would you do if your loved one's true colors were revealed?